I do like it live. Oh, we're live. How fun.
Hello, everyone.
Yay. I'm going to put a bio for Sarah in the chat so that everybody can see, so that all the fancy stuff about you, everybody can read.
Okay.
If I read it, I might throw up a little bit because I think you're so incredibly smart and
You
awesome.
want me to just
Sarah,
like
take
review
it in. Yeah,
the book?
give us the high level on your smarts. Toot your
Okay.
horn.
I mean, yeah, but I'll do it in a weird way. So I guess I would say I'm a person who grew up in Washington, D.C., and actually I'm here now in Washington, D.C., looking out the window at the incredibly green thing that is the D.C. suburbs, because the D.C. suburbs are actually in a swamp. And what that means is that I lived in a world of like a very specific kind of liberal optimism growing up. And then I began to study filmmaking and social theory and social science, and I went to a bunch of fancy universities about that. But as you may all know, in the process of that happening, the United States had some problems. And by the time I finished doing a PhD in political theory about 2 years ago, um, those problems were obviously quite severe. And in the meantime, I had done a lot of organizing and a lot of activism. I've taught in prisons. I've done a lot of feminist activism. I am the mutual aid coordinator for my neighborhood in Caledonian and Barnsbury Ward in London, which I love, but is also very hard work in certain ways. I am now part of a food cooperative system that brings very cheap food to Londoners, but also helps them organize with their neighbors. Um, yeah, and so in short, in the process of writing about politics, I also began to do it in a sort of lowercase way, right? I wasn't so much involved with like a political party or something like this. Um, and I tend to write at that intersection of human beings' real life experiences in psychology and these big political questions. Questions like, okay, but what do I do now if everything is terrible? And what if I'm an introvert and I don't really want to? Which is the question I'm getting a lot lately. And why are people like this? And why can't they be persuaded with words? And why are we all growing more and more distant from one another? So that's kind of the world in which I operate, and I operate both theoretically and practically, which I think is very important. And my latest book is called Don't Talk About Politics: Changing 21st Century Minds. And it uses a lot of the same kinds of psychology, that is to say, modern neuroscience, social psychology, cognitive science, but it uses them in a way that they are not commonly used. So I would say those disciplines are mostly used by people that are, if we're completely blunt, attempting to make the world more productive, or sometimes are trying to prevent the worst kind of polarization. And I am sort of interested in the second question in a way, but even more than that, I'm interested in helping people reclaim agency. I mean, there are times where we need to disagree with each other, and I'm certainly not interested in closing that divide necessarily.
Hmm.
So I think maybe more than a lot of people who write about polarization, I'm less worried that people disagree, and I'm more worried about not just the cost to the social fabric, although that's significant, but also the cost to people's sense that there is anything to be done in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a very short version. These are the things I'm interested in, but I'm also just, interested in chatting, and we basically just get to have a chat, which is great.
Well, thanks for chatting with me. I feel like a real honor. And I dig your book. Your book did change me because
Mm.
I think I've been one of those people that maybe believed in the marketplace of ideas. I
Oh,
think that,
yeah.
and I have a little bit of a shame on me response because I should know better because I do couples therapy for a living. And I know that two people do not convince one another of their side.
Yeah.
Instead, we have to hang out. And actually, they get very confused when I say, no, just go spend some nice time together. Go for a walk. They're like, huh? We're not going to like arm wrestle whose version of reality is correct. I'm like, no, that's not going to help your relationship, actually.
I think
Right.
that's
So I
such a
was
great
thinking,
example, yeah.
it's completely, I was like, oh my God, you could apply everything in her book to the couples therapy room. Like it's crazy, right? Just go do something that you like to do together.
Yeah, new audience, I should.
This is your next book.
Yeah.
Um, The other piece, so I took all my Kindle highlights and I printed them out with my little notes here from your book. I
Uh-huh.
do like that feature in Kindle, I must say. And I gotta say, I'm going to move away from marketplace of ideas. I'm going to reduce it down to two things. I think I want to start with this really big question. Why am I getting emotional about this? I guess this matters to me.
Emotional. Yeah.
What is a good working definition of politics? Because I feel sad that it's this dirty word to people, politics.
Yeah.
How do you define it? I don't want to know. I don't want to know how the world defines it. For you, what's the ideal definition of politics?
Great. Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I mean, you know, the way that people traditionally answer this question in academia is to be like, well, the origin of the word has to do with the polis, which is the city, you know. And so I could give you a lovely little spiel about how city life in a way is indicative of politics, because it's the place where you live close enough together that your actions affect one another, right? Um, Actually, I think that's an illusion. You know, it's not like people who live in the countryside of the United States don't affect the people that live in the city. Quite the opposite lately. In fact, I've been very interested in some research on how a stronger predictor of whether someone votes for Donald Trump is than either education or wealth is simply whether they live far away physically from other people. If they do, they're more likely to vote for him. But I guess more seriously, because etymology is not you know the only way of understanding an idea. Thank God. Um, I guess I see politics as the realm where we necessarily have to build life together. And I think one of the big illusions of the modern world is that we don't, you know? And that illusion is created by a lot of different forces. It's created by capitalism that tells us to compete with one another. It doesn't tell us explicitly, by the way. It's not that we're constantly being told that explicitly, although some people are. It's just that's the reality that shapes our world, that we have to compete. But it's also created by technology. I mean, as much as all the technology we're using right now connects us, a lot of technology also divides us, and it keeps us alone, and it keeps us focused on things that are not you know, on the world of people that we can agree with, and so on and so forth. So we're divided in that sense. Um, but more generally, I would say we're going through a period of intense individualism. You can see this, by the way, in data. I'm not just making this up. If you look at people's questions about how much they can trust their neighbors, about you know whether basically they need each other, how much they've talked to each other recently. One of the big things in this book is about social atrophy. That has
Mm-hmm.
to do with the changes in the brain that happen when people are socially isolated, which we can get into in a minute, but also the shrinking of public spaces and places we can be together. And so I guess I would say that to me, individualism is an anathema to politics, at least after a certain point. I do, of course, as a not authoritarian person, believe that there's some level of individualism that's very important, that people should have, um, you know, certain kinds of autonomy to make decisions about their personal life or their reproductive choices or their religious beliefs. I obviously still hold to that, but I also think there are a lot of areas where we actually affect each other deeply, but we now live under the pretense that we don't, and that's very harmful. So yeah, I would see it as the world where we are necessarily doing shared life, and the only question is how are we going to do it best, right?
Mm-hmm. There's a piece in your book, and I'm the ultimate reductivist, so you need to know this about me before we get
Okay,
started. I'm also very scrappy, so I try to put things in language that is like consumable by my 17 and 16-year-old sons.
that's a good
Um,
impulse, actually. Yeah.
although my 17-year-old son is super bright, so he probably could, yeah. Anyway, I loved that effectively we've reduced how we dialogue about politics into two models. And I zeroed in on I took out the marketplace of ideas and the debate and zeroed in on your use of the word commerce and war.
Okay, great. Yes.
I'm like, commerce and war. Yeah. Because my definition of politics I studied political science as an undergrad.
Hmm.
Thank you for helping me understand Jürgen Habermas for the very first time. I mean,
Yeah, maybe.
I hated political theory. I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
love that you're good at it. But for me, the purpose of politics and why I like it and why I'm surprised people don't is that for me, politics is always about care and share. It's about caring and sharing, about community. Oh, hey, Jamie. Jamie's here. Um, so I'm always interested in how do we come together and care about one another, and how do we share our resources? And I get there's all these definitions of power and access to power that we can, but I don't know. It's just, I'd rather replace commerce and war with care and share. That's all. I just needed to put
I
that
mean,
in the ground.
you know, it's tempting to tell you something like, sounds like you're a socialist. But I'm not going to get into that stuff right now, you know, at least not off the bat. Because I think this is, what I do want to say though, is this is one of the fundamental divisions, right? Like, I think there are people who do not want to do that. And really are either afraid of that, or they, for other reasons, are strongly attached to the idea that human beings cannot care and share enough to do politics that way. I disagree with them. And I disagree with them both practically speaking, in terms of looking empirically at how human beings behave. And I also
Mhm.
disagree with them philosophically. Like, I think
Mhm.
we are a much more interesting species when we care and share with bits of competition built in, for example. I don't imagine it would have none than other forms of society. I find an atomized, solely competitive world a horror to think about.
Mhm.
But I think it's a really important question, and I think it's especially important right now, because we are at peak inequality, because we are at catastrophic climate change. I mean, we could go on and on and on, but those are two particular instances where I think it's very clear what the stakes are, actually.
Yeah. Well, I took away from your book, and I would love for you to sort of say it in direct terms, that you want us to change. You want us to do something after reading your book.
Yeah, I
And
kind of
I think I would like to hear what you want us to think about and do differently.
Great. Yes. So I think one of the main things that I want people to do is change the model of reasoning that they have, which is hard. And the way I put it a little bit in this book is that uh, I kind of gently take apart the idea that we could think well merely by exchanging ideas as if we're in a marketplace, or even having our ideas go to war with each other as in debate. And we have lots of evidence that that doesn't really change anyone's mind, or have long-term effects on what societies believe even. I mean, debate seems pretty ineffective in that regard, which is fascinating. But there are things that do slowly reshape the way people see the world. And on the whole, I would say that that's positive. When we see beliefs changing over time, I mean, they can go in any direction, including towards horrible things. But we want to see a world where people could adapt to reality, right? Where their views would change over time. Stasis is probably not a sign of health in a world that is also changing. And so, and it's not a sign of reasoning, really. And there are two things that appear to change people's beliefs quite a bit. One of them is their relationships with other people, of various kinds, but especially I'm increasingly interested, and I'm somewhat writing my next book about these middle relationships. So I used to say when I was giving public lectures, we're becoming more isolated from each other, but it's actually a little bit more subtle than that. What's happening is, if you look at all of this data about human beings in the broadly speaking West, whatever that means, we're strengthening our very closest relationships. Like, people are in these sort of often monogamous romantic relationships that are unbelievably obsessively close. And that's sort of sweet and sort of troubling, but well, that's another StreamYard. Uh, and there might be obsessively, like, almost helicopter parenting their children, and then they have some, like, quite distant parasocial relationships, which is interesting. But the in between, the kind of, do you know your neighbor, and do you know the people who vote in your district, and do you know the people who run the school that your kids go to, and do you organize with people in your workplace, those relationships are incredibly weak.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the main things I want people to do is, firstly, stop seeing the idea of a good reasoner as someone who argues or just exchanges ideas, and start seeing the idea of a good reasoner or a citizen as somebody who builds those strong relationships and who reasons interpersonally, who essentially slowly adapts their views over time because they do know a lot of people through this middle category of relationship, which doesn't mean that you blindly follow whatever those middle group of people do, especially since those people are likely to disagree with one another. But you are
Mm-hmm.
now far more fundamentally aware, and not only aware, but alive to the problems that they're facing in the way that they see the world, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, I'm very interested in that model of reasoning. And I'm also interested in
Mm-hmm.
doing, and something that I'm increasingly fascinated by is the way people come to me and they say, and they really struggle with this idea that they should stop arguing. And at first, I thought it was merely that we're very attached to this liberal romantic idea of, like, reasoning this way. And I do think there's a lot to that. But I think it's also that people actually just have only been trained in that, right? Like, you think about school, like, in school, I was almost only taught to write essays, and they were all arguments. There was almost no other kind of teaching whatsoever. And then, lots of work stuff that people do in a white collar world anyway is about arguing with one another, going to
Mm-hmm.
meetings and making the case and pitch decks and whatever. And so
Mm-hmm.
increasingly, I'm sympathetic to people who are struggling to imagine a different kind of political life, because I think that it's not just that they're tied to a romantic ideal, although that does sit heavily with us, is that they also can't reimagine themselves outside of the very specific academic and professional training that most white collarish people have been through. And
Mm-hmm.
they don't know how to recapture and revalue themselves as people who instead, like, have a lot of people that they know and check in on those people and organize stuff,
Mm-hmm.
stack shelves with their hands.
Mm-hmm.
All the organizing I do is a lot of it's with my hands. And
Mm-hmm.
we've undervalued that labor, frankly. There's a kind of
Mm-hmm.
we've got to do. And then the good news is politics also gets a lot less scary, in my opinion, a lot
Mm-hmm.
less political, because you actually have all these people that now know you. You have positive social relationships and stuff to do that's active and, productive in a sense, in a different sense.
Yeah. I love this last comment you made about your hands. I don't know if how much you read about sidewalk talk, but I just got back from a listening bus tour sitting on sidewalks across the
Oh,
US.
tell me more. What was it
So
like?
I've been sitting on sidewalks for 10 years and I never thought it was political until I read your book. Well, that's not true. 5 years ago, I figured out it was pretty political.
Yeah, I imagine.
'Cause we did a bus tour after Donald Trump was elected the first time and
Yeah.
listened across the South
Mhm.
in 2017. And then we just listened across the Midwest. And there is something, the whole thing, let's just get out of the intellect for a second and say that there's something about going out to a sidewalk, carrying heavy chairs, thinking about water bottles, thinking about the kind of signs that might make somebody feel welcome and not feel like you're a canvas or asking them for money,
Mhm.
right? And practicing listening in such a way, much like the motivational interviewing that you talk about a little bit in your book, where you're genuinely more interested in what meaning this person is making of their life.
Mhm.
And I realized I'm like, oh, this is deeply political. And this year we decided to not just put free listening on our signs, but that we had community care was what was on our signs. We're just out here to care for our community. That's
Hmm.
it. That we're going to listen to demonstrate community care. And in many ways, that felt like a thread line to your book, although I really heard it's kind of got to be hard, right? You
Mhm.
kind of got to have a purpose, right?
Yeah.
And be aligned around that purpose and give something up. There's got to be a sacrifice. And those things seem to help you come together towards a cause, make you happier, and potentially put you in contact with people that are different. Am I getting that right? Did I miss a piece there?
No,
But
I
I
think
hear you saying, Traci, you're such an intellectual telling us to do very unintellectual things. I think that's the most fun part of your book.
Yeah, I mean, I think also I'm trying to expand our definition of what thinking deeply means. Like, in a way, I think that intellectuals are people who do things with their hands. Or another way of putting this is, people have started asking, like, okay, well, what does it mean to be a public intellectual now? And
Mm,
I think there are a lot of reasons for asking that question. There's the kind of like,
mhm,
whoa, we're living through the second Trump administration question. There's the wait, but a lot of what you do now, Sarah, is create 1-minute reels on Instagram that go viral. So what does that mean, right? And having thought about it quite a bit, I would say that if one is going to be a public intellectual, this has always been true to a degree. It's just that we need to reimagine it again today. What you are doing is demonstrating a kind of labor that everyone can do, or at least I, as a very egalitarian democratic person, think everyone can do pretty much. Obviously, maybe there are some exceptions here and there with complex disability. I don't know, one different question, but most people on planet Earth, I think, can be intellectuals in some way, because intellectual life is a kind of activity. I don't even say labor, although there's labor involved. It's an activity that we can all do,
mhm,
which is to
mhm.
wrestle with ideas. But I think in order to wrestle with them well, it means also to like live them in the world. That's what I say at the end of the book. There are two ways to love ideas. One is to think about them in the abstract, and the other one is to live them in the world. And I
Mhm,
think intellectuals have to do both. And
mhm.
frankly, it would be absurd, ridiculous of me to go around telling people, "Oh, I think that probably you should do this based on some studies I read," and not do it. you know? And
Yeah.
so something that I try to do and it's a careful fine line to walk for all kinds of reasons, from security to not annoying people. But I also try to show people, like, I am doing this life that I'm talking about.
Mhm.
I really
There's a
believe in my neighbors. I live in a
Yeah.
communal house that I made from scratch, and I am never going to live in a nuclear family ever. And I don't think that's right for everyone, but I really do believe in what I'm talking about, and I'm doing it. And whatever version you find that works for you, I hope you also really do it and not just think about it.
Why not nuclear family? Can I ask that, or is that too prying?
No, no. I mean, for me personally, lots of reasons. But let's talk about why for people in general first, because I don't think everything about my life choices is generalizable, right? Why not the nuclear family? Kind of because of what I've talked about earlier to start with, right? So if you look at the trends over the last 50 to 70 years in the US and the UK, again, we're seeing a couple of really close bonds that people have, and then a vast sea of isolation outside of them,
Mhm, mhm,
and many possible downstream effects of that, most of which are fairly negative for society as a whole. So many people we're not actually lonelier, but we are more alone, which is an interesting contradiction. People don't actually report being lonelier than they did 20 or 50 years ago, but they are more alone for more hours of the day. That's extremely worrying to me, especially because of what that probably means for people's neurons, but also what it means for our political life. Um, a probably reduced sphere of understanding because we understand a lot of issues through each other. So if your sphere of understanding is tons of hours with your spouse, but not that many with your neighbors, you probably understand the world less well, right? Ultimately, not because your spouse isn't great, not your personal spouse.
Little side tip, couples
Yeah,
therapist here.
yeah.
Couples that go on a double date have more sex after a double
Really?
date than they do when they're just alone with their spouse, because we actually get more out of that interaction because we get to see parts of our partner come alive when they're interacting with their neighbors.
Yeah, I actually have this with one of my partners in particular. I'm like, oh, right, that's what I like about him because he's yeah. Well, anyway, I'm not going to analyze my poor spouse on television so much, but there is something to that, absolutely, right? Um, I also think that, you know, I actually think it's very telling what you're telling me about the idea of care, right? And in a traditional liberal political paradigm, care is a private activity outside of politics. And
Mm-hmm.
I disagree.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I actually think care is a very necessarily political activity. The feminist movement obviously had a lot to say about this because women were tasked with much, if all kinds of care. And the fact that they were is an enormously political fact with many political consequences. So look, the you know to nestle all of that care within an incredibly like narrow and fragile framework of the nuclear family, the very short way of putting this is it harms a lot of people, and it
Mm.
harms people in ways that are not always obvious even to the people experiencing it, and yet in the long run that harm is significant. Um, and yeah, so this is a challenging thing to write about. It's not actually so much in this book, but it certainly will be in my next book. But I guess the point is, look, I think I don't think I'm not sure there's a generalizable format for care for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Unlike people who think the nuclear family is the only way to do it, I don't think I would ever prescribe like this is exactly how it should be for everyone. But I do think that right now the units that we live in and give care in are too small and they are too normative. And if you do anything outside of them, you are judged. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
harmful for everyone. And also it makes
Yeah.
us incredibly vulnerable to other things, financial
Yeah.
problems, domestic abuse, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a poster child for some of the things that you talk about in this book because my politics changed after listening on sidewalks.
Tell me,
My friend group changed.
tell me more.
I'm actually a little less liberal, actually.
Mhm.
I'm a little more centrist liberal because I got to hear stories from people all over the world, actually. And when I heard their stories, and then more importantly, I would say 6 of my closest friends are from the project now. And they're
Mm.
not people I would have been friends with had I not been part of this project. And so they're from different races, different classes, different parts of the country. And I'd become a better listener. So it means that I don't defend when they're sharing their story and sort of need to double down on my own politics. I'm really curious, like, well, why do you see it that way? And how come? And, you know, because listening is the centerpiece, they'll ask me the same questions. So there's not a lot of groupthink. We're all chewing on something together and trying to sense make together. And I
Yeah.
think it's my favorite part, right? But to your point, how do we create more of this in the world where this kind of broadening of the social care circle or widening of it becomes commonplace and even liberate people from structures of the nuclear family, which I think were sort of I think they were originated oppressively anyway, sometimes,
Mhm.
right? In this modern society, and the freedom to sort of widen that without discarding it, without sort of choosing to just hire people for stuff that you need, but actually rely on one another, seems like a hard thing to make a social change around. I did want to just give you, can I just show you that you've got a couple comments?
Yeah, I
Someone
actually don't
asked,
understand this software very well, so I feel like I've seen some pop up, but I
yeah,
don't.
I popped them up. So Kaya talked about what about embodied politics? Dr. Susan Kahn wanted to say your book's going down well in Westminster. So just wanted to give you a couple little shout outs there.
Great.
Maybe this is the part of me that's impatient.
Sure.
Maybe you've already answered, but I want to make a material change in this. I want this widening of our social circles. I want us to care about one another. You know, my only limitation where I'm living now is I'm living in a country where I don't speak the language. Otherwise, I'd be at my elderly next door neighbor is not doing well, and I hate that I don't speak German because I'd be at his house every day otherwise. You know.
Yeah. Well, there's always food, right? I think food is the other universal language. I know people think music is or whatever, and okay, that's interesting too, but A, I'm really bad at music. And B, yeah, I'm very much an anarchist, at least in the respect that I believe in the food not bombs approach to reaching out to people. But yes, what do we do and how can we do it in a way that doesn't take forever is a great question. I'm going to say two things. So one of them is, firstly, that actually I am a really impatient person in practice. You know, like day to day, I'm impatient. Why hasn't this thing been done already? Why hasn't anyone ever responded to my emails? Where are my glasses? Like I am not constitutionally disposed to patience whatsoever. But I actually think that there's a certain mindset one needs to be involved in politics for the rest of one's life that requires a completely different vision of time. And that's really hard, but it is the thing that has absolutely saved me. And I also think, you know, I often look at studies on activists, and there's a framework someone put out about long distance runners. The idea that if you look at activist movements, and I've seen this over and over again myself, a lot of the time you have like a bunch of people there that are excited and they're energized, and maybe they're angry because something bad has happened, like a bad election result or a, you know, horrible set of sexual assault revelations, or I mean any number of things, and they're there and they care, and then they do a season of activism, and then, you know, because either they burn out or they just get distracted or they go back to work or whatever happens. But then there are also people who are there for life. They are there no matter what. And occasionally, of course, they might switch movements or tactics or strategies, or maybe even move to a different issue for a while or something, but they are basically in, for lack of a better word, the struggle for life. And I'm definitely that person in my own way. I mean, I write more books maybe than really is useful for the world, but I am, you know, embedded forever. I'm in the mutual aid I've been doing has been going on for 6 years now, and they have my phone number, and they'll never get rid of me, you know? And I've been doing activism since I was 18 years old. So I guess I've looked at these studies about activists, and I've thought about it a lot for myself also. And one of the things that I think allows people to live like that is that they can't expect to see the fruits of the plant that they put in their soil, right? Like it's that the plant will never see grow to fruition, because the results of trying to make a social change are very long. I mean, you and I are living through what I would argue is an experimental era in feminism. Truly, we're like, such a new thing. 100 years is nothing. Are you kidding? My grandmother was born before most of this stuff happened. It's so new.
Yeah.
And honestly, some of it we're still waiting to see if it's a success. I mean, is there some like Beatles quote about this or something where they say, you know, who knows? We'll find out in 500 years. How well do we do? You know. This is also why I tend to discourage the framework of the apocalypse, because I actually think it's a short-sighted format. Like we're living through a new thing, capitalism. I mean, maybe we're in late stage capitalism. Maybe it's new. Maybe it's going on for 1,000 more years. We just don't know. So I guess the first thing is I would say, yes, it's good to want immediate results because people are suffering, but I think we also have to have this really long-term perspective of like, we don't know, and we'll probably never see a lot of the results of the things we do now. And once I can frame things that way, I'm actually more motivated, not less motivated, because on the other hand, that's a grand vision. Like, oh my gosh, how exciting. I do believe there will be human beings in 2,000 years, and I'm most interested in what I can do for them in some ways, as much as the people that matter now also matter very much. Then there's another question, which is like, yeah, but we also need to do something now. And yeah, I mean, in the book, I've given quite a few examples of things, and there are two that particularly seem to motivate people. One has to do with the food cooperative I briefly talked about. And that has to do with organizing people to live really close to you, like 1 or 2 blocks, and saying, do you want to order groceries together? Basically. And that model is fairly replicable almost anywhere on earth, and it tends to reduce people's food costs by significant amounts, especially for fresh vegetables, for reasons that have to do with how screwed up food production is in capitalism. But in the process, of course, what also happens is you get to know your neighbors. Like everyone needs food. Everyone benefits from bulk purchases and then splitting that up among all of you. But also now you know your neighbors. You know who lives in their house. You know when someone's sick. You know when someone's traveling. You know each other, right? So that's one example. I think another key example is about building spaces that people can be in. And every year, since I've started researching this, more and more studies come out that show that we are seeing a massive decline in social space. One just came out, I think, yesterday or something like that from a big British think tank. Doesn't really matter. Yeah, just showing, now they're beginning to really measure like how quickly are pubs closing and restaurants closing and free green spaces closing and playgrounds closing? And the answer is all too rapidly. Certainly the same in the United States, and it probably to a significant degree around the world. And I'm very concerned about these social spaces, which serve a really important democratic function and also kind of just make it possible for people to enjoy being near each other, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing I tend to encourage people to do to get started is to find a social space, not make one from scratch usually. I find that tends to not be the best approach, but find one that already exists and save it because it's probably in danger. Make it
Mm-hmm.
better, make it more interesting, make it more accessible to a wide variety of people, but go save the social spaces. And there's almost certainly one that's really near you or that could be resuscitated really near you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love, there was another quote that I think you were quoting Hannah Arendt, perhaps, talking about social isolation leading to authoritarianism, and that these social spaces, saving them is super important to creating, whether it's democracy or some other kind of sort of social democratic system, that these social spaces are the places where we are. I mean, it is political. Our interactions with other humans just is political, because if I define it by sharing care, that it's always political to me. Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
before you, I want to bring in a couple. There's another question here
Sure.
that we have from Eugenie Rodriguez. Eugenie, I cannot say the third name. I apologize. I'm not going to try. How do you suggest we navigate how we project worse caricatures on certain groups?
Great.
You want to take this question on?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm going to answer you with social science. I think there's two things to say here. So first is more generally about talking to strangers. I mean, the number one objection I get when I talk about the stuff I talk about um, is, interestingly, it's not even from people that are worried about COVID, which of course matters when we talk about meeting up physically, right? Or disability, which obviously matters and has significant weight. You know, these things matter to me a lot, but actually I find the people that write to me about disability and COVID actually really want to be integrated into the community. And, you know, maybe that requires different things, but they're interested in the question, like they're interested in solving it. So they're quite, they're ready to play ball and think about some ideas. But actually the main objections I get are about introversion. People come to me and they say, I don't want to talk to other people. Like, no. I'm laughing not because I think this is a stupid response. I think it's a human response. I think it's just interesting that many of the problems that actually we face in the public sphere are more subtle and more about emotion and more about the way people see themselves than they are about, like, to be honest, a very male model of politics is like debate is, you know? Actually, a lot of the reasons people don't get involved in politics are about their social anxieties, basically, or their social preferences. Um, and I write a lot about how, yeah. But to answer this question, to start with, there's actually a lot of research on how well people can predict whether they're going to have a good conversation with a stranger. And the answer is we're really bad at predicting whether we're going to like having a conversation with a stranger. Most people, if you ask them, hey, I'm potentially going to ask you to have a conversation with a stranger for 30 minutes. How do you feel about that? Most people will say, absolutely not. Or at least they really don't think they're going to enjoy it, you know? And then psychologists will have them have the conversation with a randomly assigned stranger. So again, not a person that they necessarily share beliefs with or demographic characteristics with or anything like that. And in fact, they've done a lot of studies looking at like cross-race chats, etc. And people like it, and they like it a lot more than they thought they would. And they also tend to underestimate how much they're going to learn from each other, and they also tend to underestimate how long they're going to want the conversation to go on for. So they end up wanting it to go on for much longer than even they're allowed to have it go on for based on the like whatever format. This is true of in-person conversations and on the subway conversations. They did research on that, and online conversations during COVID. People are really bad at knowing how much they're going to like having conversations with strangers. It's one of the reasons I tend to very gently take questions from people who identify as introverts a little bit gently and suspiciously, which is not to say I don't believe them at all, but I think it's always worth being suspicious of ourselves. Are we good judges of how much we're going to enjoy a social life? I think none of us are to a significant degree. We're just not that good at judging this. It's part of a larger phenomenon around human personality that you may be aware of, which is we're pretty bad at projecting in general what's going to make us happy in the future or what life is going to be like in the future. We significantly underestimate all kinds of things. And it turns out one of them is how much we like conversations with strangers. Then there's a question about difference here, social difference, whether that's, I'm imagining you mean something about like anything from political belief to race to age to gender to sexuality and so on. And I'm heartened, first of all, that the studies that include significant difference show the same results, that we actually do enjoy talking to people that have different political views from us. And I agree with you, Tracy, by the way, despite being, I would say, in many ways, a categorically left-wing person in a number of areas, that I really care about power imbalances and inequality and climate change and I want all the trans liberation and all of this. But I actually don't mind discussing it with people that disagree with me within reason. I mean, obviously, if they're going to attack me for my, I don't know, gender or something, I will. But more broadly, I really enjoy it because it's like getting a window into another universe. I mean, curiosity can sustain quite a lot of connection, right? That doesn't mean I don't continue to hold on to my beliefs, but it does mean that I'm very curious. And I think curiosity actually can sustain a lot of this from the start. It's not that I go into social interactions and I think, yes, I'm going to like this person. I mean, that's too high of a bar, actually, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think,
Mm-hmm.
could I learn something? Yeah. I mean, you can learn something from your enemies,
Mm-hmm.
And I often come in with that framework to start with, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Also just knowing I'll probably like a lot of things I don't think I'm going to enjoy. Once I'm there, I'll like it, which doesn't mean you have to think the person is the best person ever. It's a really different thing. Yeah.
Can I share a story?
Please.
I've shared this once before, but it's from the bus tour because you asked earlier about your question, Eugenie. One, I love doing workshops and talking to strangers. I'm really super good at it. So I'll just toot my own horn there. I love teaching people how to do this. And actually introverts need it too. They usually need a setup that's a little bit more mindful about their energy because they get overwhelmed differently. And there's ways to do that where you're not overwhelmed. But the piece that I wanted to say around difference is I had this conversation with a man that couldn't have been more politically different, but we talked for an hour in the middle of the country, and he had some very different views on what's going on in the Middle East. And he kind of wanted to persuade me, and I said, oh, not totally persuadable, but it seems like you seem very excited that there is a biblical prophecy coming to pass right now. And why I might not hold those views, I'm wondering what that gives you. And so I didn't get caught in the intellectual disagreement. I was more interested in the purpose of the belief. What did that give him in terms of meaning? What did that give him in terms of identity? And he said, well, the world feels really scary. And it gives me comfort to think that there's actually some kind of plan. And I said, comfort. Huh. Do you think that you need more comfort right now? He said, oh, yeah. I said, God, me too. I could use more comfort right now. So maybe that's what we have in common. And I realized that it's having this capacity. I'm kind of, this is my new buzzword for the next 6 months as a therapist. I think therapy is about teaching people to bear unbearable feelings. That's it. So that you can stay uncomfortable and in these conversations, so that you can let this other person have a different point of view, but listen for the humanity underneath. And it's just, to me, it's a practice. I just have to practice it every day, right? I hope that's not taking the floor too much, but I just loved this story because it's really imprinted me and left me realizing, and I think that he was moved too. Like, oh, I had a conversation with someone on a topic that I don't agree with, but we seem to find our way together. Eugenie's going to ask a follow-up, but do you want to say something more there?
Yeah, I want to agree with you. And just to point out, dissonance theory, which I read about a lot in this book, is about discomfort. And often discomfort people actually can't recognize consciously. So, while this is a little bit speculative, I think there's a really important set of questions around, like, how do you bear that discomfort also, right? I can't see the follow-up. Do you want to bring it up so I can see it?
I'm gonna bring it up now. I just wanted to wait until I finished. I wanted to listen to you fully, give you my undivided attention before I give you Eugenie my undivided attention. I don't mean the personal aspect of wanting to overcome their barrier as an introversion, but to invite people to overcome. We're in a time where it's so difficult into the same space. So how do you build communities, especially across class?
I think that you should offer something someone needs. Like the food co-op works because everyone needs food, right? There's no one on earth who doesn't need food. And most of the people that the organizing is geared to in that case, for example, are at least working class and maybe even quite poor, depending on the situation, right? But I actually, and I to be honest, I think a lot of liberal organizing doesn't do this. because it doesn't take class seriously enough, to be honest, right? Why would someone come into your space if you're not offering them something incredibly useful? But it doesn't have to be food. It could be, I will help you learn how to fix stuff. I will
Mhm.
help you fix
Mhm.
your bike. I will
Mhm.
give you a good space for your kids to be that's clean and safe and interesting for them,
Mhm.
that you can be there with other parents. That's a valuable thing for people. I will give you, even a quiet place where people won't necessarily talk to you all the time, but you're allowed to be here. I mean, in
Yeah.
a world with increasingly small social spaces, that's a big deal. So I actually think
Yeah.
to start with the offer of like, you're going to do a full-on democracy right now. You start with the
I
offer.
I, I love that.
Yeah.
It makes me think of Eugenie. There's a project, it's lost its funding, sadly, but I think what they do is they give the actual format and structure away. So Sidewalk Talk used to partner with Lava May in San Francisco. They took retired city buses and turned them into mobile showers for people living on the street.
Mhm.
And they created an entire day every month outside the public library where there was food, clothing, job placement, dentists, doctors, hair cutters, washing machines to wash your clothes. And then we served the idea, the framework was radical hospitality. You were not going to treat these folks like they were folks living on the street, but they were just like you stepping into Nordstrom, and this was their Nordstrom for the day. So I would go serve them coffee. I would say, would you like an acupuncture treatment while you're sitting here? And that actually changed a lot of our listeners because we had this opportunity to meet people across class and really hear about their lives. And if you wanted to recreate something like that, there's also another project called All Us. Sorry, I only know the Bay Area ones. All Us is for
Oh, good.
farm workers in California. They
Mhm.
actually have also a bus that goes out to the farms with washing machines, mental health treatment, food, um, uh, to support farm workers. So those are other projects that you can check out. All Us in Half Moon Bay and Lava May in San Francisco.
I think hospitality is a wonderful thought. And I think it's something we really struggle with in an individualistic society. And one of the reasons that people, for example, have this thing where they don't think they're going to enjoy talking to a stranger is they think they're going to be an imposition to the stranger.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So, oh, I'm going to annoy this person by talking to
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think one has to get this kind of strange balance of learning to ask for support, which people are really bad at, right? I actually think that's one of the best things to do is to go up to your neighbor and say, "I need something," because actually, almost every single time I've ever been asked for anything, I felt honored. Very occasionally, I'll feel
Totally.
or okay, I actually can't do that today or whatever. Of course, that happens.
Hmm.
Yeah. But most of them, like, wow, they asked me, even if I don't
Yeah.
know them. So I actually think a lot of the time people think, oh, it's, and I do think we should go create these material offers, especially as you point. Those are lovely projects, by the way. For people that really do need stuff. But also, we should go ask them for stuff. Who doesn't need help? We probably need more help than we think we do. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I know we're at the end of our time with you that we scheduled for you. I want to tell you a heartfelt thank you for
Oh,
taking the
thank you. Thank
time
you for
to
this.
choose these ideas for us
Mhm.
so that we could think alongside of you and be inspired by you to get out of the thinking and talking about all this stuff, but actually just going and doing it. And I do think it's left a material impact on me. So I do feel a genuine gratitude to you for wrestling these words onto the page, truly. And for those of you that are listening, the name of the most current book is Don't Talk About Politics. I'm imagining that you've got more to come. I'd love to read a book from you on how to be in community, even
Yeah,
when it's
kind of
hard.
what the book is in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else that you want to say? And then we have a little ritual, which is I invite you to speak directly to, there's about 10,000 listeners that have listened on the sidewalk with Sidewalk Talk over the last 10 years. So our closing ritual is, are there any words of wisdom or a wish that you want to speak directly to them, not to me?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways the invitation is about the thing I just talked about how we really fear needing each other and asking each other for things, including even the basics of a conversation. And I think my plea is simply begin that process of trying to do that even when it's awkward.
Mm,
Um, and I guess my other plea is to write me actually. If you have a story or an insight about what would make it easier for people to do that or how doing that changed your life, I would love to hear from you because I am writing a book about the role of social connection in politics and how hard it is for people, a lot of people write me saying that they're introverted or they're not neurotypical or they're scared or they're anxious, but it doesn't have to be about that. It could be about something else. I would just love to hear from you, and I would learn a lot, I hope.
So in the show notes and in the chat, you can actually find Sarah's Substack, her Instagram. So those are all places that you can reach her. This conversation will go live on the Sidewalk Talk podcast. I just want to thank you so, so much. And before you go, I just wanted to show you a couple comments of some thank yous that came in on LinkedIn from folks that have been watching along. So thank you so much, Sarah, for
putting this together and finding my work. I mean, it's so nice to hear also how it's connected to therapy and to this like amazing thing with the sidewalk chats. And I wonder, yeah, hopefully after this call, you can send me a little bit more about that too, because maybe it will fit for more.
Oh, I'm going to get you to come listen with me. I used to live in Old Town Alexandria. We'll go listen in DC. Yeah, and one of our chapter leaders lives in DC right now, and I was just sleeping on her sofa 6 weeks ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Email me some contacts and I'll try to do that because I'd love to.
I will do. All right, everyone. Thank you.
Really appreciate you tuning in.